Hi, don't worry. Um, Hi, everyone. My name's Alex Buchan. I'm an investment director at Northstar Ventures. So we are an early stage VC based up in Newcastle. We've been around for about 20 years, investing in innovative businesses in the region. So our patch is the Northeast, which variously stretches from Berwick down to Durham or Berwick down to Teesside, depending on the fund that we're running. Um, our remit when we were started was to put help provide capital for early stage businesses in a region which was particularly starved of capital. Do you want to go to the second slide, Sonia? In a region which was starved of venture capital, frankly, and because of that, the entrepreneurial ecosystem was fledgling to say the least. So over the last 20 years, us and other firms have been investing and been building companies and building an entrepreneurial ecosystem in the Northeast. And during that time, since 2004, we've invested about 100 million into the market up here. And we've probably leveraged another 300 million of co-investment money coming in from other sources. So co-investment is sort of completely in our DNA, and we work with partners on pretty well every deal that we do. We specialize in putting the first check into businesses through to Series A. So we work with people who really are very, very early in their journey as entrepreneurs. We've also run a lot of accelerator programs over the years. And we have the ability to take that. So we put an early check in, and then we follow the business and work with them, and we work with other investors until generally round about Series A, then that's when we pass the baton to others. So over the years, we've had a number of exits, and we have a portfolio currently of around about 60 companies which are actively trading, working, building things, etc. I came up from I've had a sort of early stage background, commercialization background is where I came to before I got into investing. And I was particularly interested in the tech transfer aspect. And so I've spent really most of my time up here working with the universities in the region, particularly Newcastle and Durham, building long-standing partnerships, working with them on building, helping their entrepreneurial academics getting spin outs investment ready, and then acting as and investing in those businesses. So we have a portfolio of around about 15 spin outs now, all at the moment from Newcastle and Durham universities, and there's a strong focus. Probably about 75% of those are in the life sciences. We don't specialize, so we've got investments in everything from electric motors to DNA amplification. But what we're looking for is really good, strong ideas, really scalable ideas, good management teams, and we'll go into that in some more detail when when Sonia starts asking some questions. And we work very closely with Innovate UK as an investor partner, and we've done multiple programs with Innovate as the investor partner since about 2016. So if you move to the next slide, this is just a number of our university portfolio, which range from low carbon materials, which is a carbon negative building material used in road building and building blocks, through to Nunabio, which synthesizes DNA at scale and assembles DNA at scale. So we really very, very different businesses. I think Nunabio, Glycoscore, New Cells, they're in the life science space. Advanced Electric Machines is an electric machine business, a motor business. Microbit is a materials business, as is Dragonfly. So there's a real mixture of stuff. And Glycoscore is worth mentioning because that's one where we've worked with Prostate Cancer UK, prostate cancer research. Sorry, Sonia. And Nanovari also. So we've got two co-investments alongside PCR where we work with them closely. I just thought, as a sort of kickoff for what we're talking about today, just thinking about what the benefits of working with charities from an investor point of view. I mean, if you look at the businesses that we invest in, a lot of them have had charity money as grants prior to spin out from the university. So there is often a charity involvement, particularly CRUK. We've got one with an Alzheimer's charity and prostate cancer research, PCUK. And so we have those, and that's something that we look at. If a charity is being involved in this, we do see this as part of the due diligence process for when we look at the business. So there's a sort of a good benefit right at the beginning of the process. But as we co-invest and as we work with businesses and the charities which are involved in them, I think the following are really the sort of the key things that we see, where charities can provide us with a great deal of, with a great deal of support. And this is the things that we really value. So, sector and technical knowledge, patient advocacy, which is really important, and the charities are very much more in contact than we could ever be. General black book in terms of key opinion leaders, regulators, etc. Understanding of the regulatory and treatment pathways, again, which is, as a generalist investor, having that specialist knowledge is really important for us. Obviously, we've co-invested, and obviously businesses have had grant funding from charities, so that's important. But also, charities have good reputation, and having them as shareholders, again, is an endorsement of a particular business, a particular technology. And so, frankly, to put it bluntly, you look good on the cap table. So I think there's a really good relationship between investors and charities, which we should be exploiting. For the moment, that's probably all I need to say.
I'm Oliver Sexton. I'm an investment director here at a fund called UKIS. So we're very similar in some respects to Alex's fund at Northstar, but we do some slightly different stuff as well. So we're a pan-UK fund. We're about 110 million. We invest in different sectors. So we invest in companies using biology, and that's a bit I manage. That's about a third of the fund. We invest in fusion. We can invest in space. But all these companies that overlap in terms of ambition and risk. So we like engaging with really early stage risky companies that have got really groundbreaking solutions to big problems. These are all grandiose words, but what we're happy with is people that are really ambitious, that want to cure cancer, that want to solve blindness. That's the space that we operate. If you could possibly, brilliant, thank you. So our job is to help do two or three things. So the first is to work across the research base in the UK. That could be from charity backing, or it could be from academics, or it could be individuals that have possibly got a slight bit of evidence that their approach to something is going to be effective. And then we put enough money in to get to good risk point. So we typically invest in companies somewhere between 100 to 500k. We like to get engaged right at foundation. So we've worked a lot with TTOs and indeed with charities that have funded through TTOs and directly to spin companies out. We very heavily syndicate, and what that means is we very often work with other investors. So we're very, very happy to bring other people into deals. In fact, over time, on the companies that I've invested in, the ratio is about 1 to 30 of our money to other money. And we're very patient investors, so that means that we can invest again. And the one thing that happens in companies using biology is it never quite works as planned. It always takes a bit longer. So you can see there what our investment thesis is: roughly 100 to 500 to start with, and then we invest again over time. And we often invest alongside Innovate UK. Could you skip slides, please?
Sorry, Oliver, it's not moving along for some reason. Hold on, let's see what's happened. Something's gone wrong.
Okay. Well, as I said, I invest across companies in biology. So we have a lot of healthcare companies. We've invested chiefly in therapeutics, but we've invested in associated tools and software. So we have companies that have got software for helping develop therapeutics and for manufacturing platforms. Thank you. This is a good slide. We have companies that have got the hardware to help manufacture therapies, and then we invest in platforms that are leading to assets. So anything that touches the healthcare space is relevant to us. And as I said, we are disease agnostic, and we are indication agnostic. My own background, to give you a bit of a summary.
Sorry, I'm going to have to just leave it on this slide. I'm going to do it like this. I think
If
people
you
could
could,
see.
okay, if you could go to the last one of my three, that'd be most useful. So, well, this one, if people stop and look at this, is just a sense where our money comes from. Okay, well, that's fine. This one's useful as well. So I come from a healthcare background. I've been running this fund now for about 9 years. Before that, I worked in another healthcare VC, and then I worked in industry in a biotech company 5 years ago. I was involved in the licensing and the financial side. And then my first proper job was a consultancy working in healthcare and biotech strategy. So I've been living and breathing healthcare for a bit. And what we do is when we work with those age companies, this is relevant. This is our investment process, but it's worth thinking about because Sonia's got some really cool questions later. And VCs don't think like academics. VCs think a bit differently. And so what we tend to try to do is we are, as I said, really interested in identifying those companies that have got big ambitions, that have got really big problems that they're trying to address, and have got a clear route to where they get to. And this just gives you a bit of insight into how we go about looking at companies when we first come across you. So we have an initial meeting. So our first date is we get to know each other. It might be at an event, it might be at an academic office, TTO. We go through a deck, the plan, and we'll ask lots of questions. Assuming that we like you and you like us, we go through a process which is a kind of initial early meeting where I socialize early with my colleagues. They ask me lots of questions that sometimes are brilliant and sometimes are really difficult to answer. I will inevitably fire them back to you as founders. And we get to the next stage, which is we work through the investment process to the point of view that we've made a decision to invest, which is the investment committee. En route to that, we often lead investments. And what that means is we pull together the term sheets, the pricing of an investment. So we work with the founders and the management and other investors to work out some of the key terms, which is when you set up a company. And then finally, we end up, as an acting investor, we typically take board positions. So we sit on the management, the executive management, so to speak, non-executive management side of a company, which means that we can help give advice over time. And that's fairly common for no stage VC. What's unusual about us is we try very hard to be hands-on, and we're all quite geeky. I'm a biologist. My investment associate is a biochemist. My investment manager is a biologist. We like to kind of dig into the science and really get a sense of where you're going with your plans. So that's us as a fund. Thank you for the day.
Thank you very much, Oliver and Alex, for those presentations and introductions. So as we discussed, we'll do a Q&A, and please feel free, everybody on the call, to join in. If you could just introduce yourselves before you ask a question, but I'll kick off. So how do you guys define a big idea? So Oliver, should we come to you first?
Yeah, I mean, look, the classic kind of the cliche that you hear people talk about in VCs, Facebook or hairdresser. And what I mean by that is like just fundamentally, how many people and how big a problem are you trying to solve? And a big idea could be two things. It could be a big market, and actually in healthcare often is a big market because lots of people sadly get the same disease in different parts of the world. So the other thing that we look for is an understanding of the competition. What is out there? Is this a disease that's already been treated? Is there space for an innovation? Is there a need for an innovation? Those are all things that we are nervous about. And the reason that's important is ultimately, whilst it's fundamentally very important to develop diseases for rare and ultra rare, drugs for rare and ultra rare diseases, it's hard because you have a smaller patient population. And so the reality is that we're looking for areas that we can make a difference in. And that's reflected in the ability to work with late stage investors that are very commercial compared to we are, that typically back those ideas that are more valuable. And the other thing, therefore, we look for is an understanding of the competition. So it's really interesting to us to talk to academic groups that have looks around and they say, well, look, we've got a really interesting solution, but we're aware that this research is happening at that university and we've seen that company is in phase 1 or 2 clinical trials. So we're looking for a kind of a self-awareness and a big global problem. That would be our two big things.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the key thing is to have that ambition, not to build something which can scale. I mean, I think we sit in a slightly different area to Oliver in that we tend not to invest into therapeutics.
Right.
That we don't have a market. You know, you've got a fairly exact patient number in a therapeutic. You know how many people have got the disease, etc. So where we're sitting is in looking at solving the problems which often sit behind that. So, for example, in animals, you know, in testing, building biological systems for testing drugs, etc., as an example. And so, what you're looking at again, you're still looking for the size of the idea, and you're also looking the size of the ambition of the business and the realism, and also their ability, the team's ability to make realistic assumptions about what they can take. I mean, the devastating statement, which often comes in bad pitches, is the market's 10 billion. We only need to get 1% of that, and we'll be real rich. That is, that there's a lack of analysis there, which is really which just simply doesn't work. If you know that you've got a new market which is worth 100 million, and you can get 70% of it because you've got something which is so much better than what's there, or there is no incumbent, then you start thinking this is valuable. The ideas are big enough. So it's a lot of it is quite nuanced, and you have to really think about what where the idea fits and what it does and what it can do over time.
Yeah. So I think, Alex, you and I meet people at a similar stage. So often, very broadly, the typical companies I interact with, all the people that are going to set a company have never done it before, but they know the science inside out. And therefore, you can have really interesting conversations with them about patient stratification or uptake of medical device. And you can help build them and work with them to get a decent market forecast. Or alternatively, talking to people that have got some experiences and a bit ahead of the curve, and you can challenge all of their assumptions. I think the key thing for both of us probably is getting comfortable with the market and the company's plans to address the market. That's what we're really looking for.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see lots of slides where people just take the number of people with the disease and then take a percentage that they're going to meet, and then that's their market, but actually it doesn't really reflect what part of the market they're going to get. So what makes it venture backable? I suppose what makes it something that if it's an idea and you think, okay, it can take a big part of the market, what then makes it something which is more a venture investment as opposed to needing a grant? Oliver?
Okay, so shall I start here from the end game? So we are an unusual VC because part of the money comes from the UK government, and that means that we have a very laid-back attitude to technical risk. But that doesn't stay in place all the time because we're not the right fund to put £20 million into your product, so we have to work with other investors. Those other investors are trying to return cash to their backers, which are called their limited partners, and they can only spend their money once. And so what they're really looking for is where does the biggest multiple of their money go? So if we invest £1 in this company and £1 in that company, which one is worth more when it exits? And so what we're trying to find to make something venture backable is a combination of how big it could be when it's sold and how likely it is to get to being sold. And that is impacted by the ability to work. So you can't sell a time machine, but it'd be quite a cool product if you could. But we're also not interested in backing stuff that isn't big enough because we understand that the risk is there. So in general, a rule of thumb for VC is you want to find companies that are going to be at least 10 times more valuable than when you first invest, because you've got to allow for something going wrong. And what that means for us is big ideas addressing big markets with a rational plan to overcome the risks that they face. We can take those risks together, but we need to see a solution to them.
Alex?
I think I endorse all that. I'd also have to look at, I think one of the other things it's a question which is it's around quite a lot at the moment, is where are venture funds fit for purpose in terms of both the product or service which is being developed or the therapeutic, and also a lot of it's around what the ambitions of the management are, what people really want out of the business. Because if you don't start this journey with the same, in lockstep, you're going to have it's going to be a really difficult life for everybody. So you need to have a management team which actually wants to start something, build it, and then sell it within a reasonable time frame for a lot more money than got put in. So Oliver's metrics works absolutely fine. If you want to build a service business which is going to go, which is going to be yours for the next 20 years, and you're getting, and doesn't mean it's in any way a worse business, but it means that probably you need to look at different sources of funding, because it's not you're going to be in antagonism with your investors all the time, because they have very different outlooks. So you've got to be very careful about the type of investment you take if you're spinning out or you're an entrepreneur. But you've also and you've got to work out where what we need. We're only part of the market, We're an important part of the market, but we're only part of the market. And it's really important that everybody understands that. Sometimes people come to us and they get really cross when we don't give them money, even though the idea is very good, because they're just wrong for what we do. And they'd just be really unhappy if we spent the next 5 years trying to work together with differing agendas. So those things are all really important to think before you approach companies that companies like us.
Alex, the most common headache I have with that is when I meet companies that are, from our point of view, trying to get to revenue too soon.
Yeah.
So it might sound counterintuitive, but if you're a company that's got a really big product, the chances are it's going to take quite a lot of proving and demonstrating. And we don't want you to get distracted by trying to find companies that are going to pay you a bit of money up front for a slightly diminished product. And I'll give you an example of a company we were talking to a few weeks ago. It's a life science company, happens to be in agriculture rather than in biotech. So it's got a very clever technology platform that you could use to transform plants, and so make plants slightly better, so disease tolerant, taste, superior taste. It could develop its own plants and take those to market, which is a really big idea, but is risky and takes a lot of time. Or it could get paid by other agtech companies to develop traits for those companies. And that's what those companies want to do initially, because obviously it's attractive, they can get a decent revenue. But that's not venture backable, because how do you take a share of the long-term success in that product if you don't own it all? So that kind of moving to revenue prematurely, whilst it's good for some companies, tends to be a bit of a warning sign to VC.
That's very interesting, because a lot of the VCs we speak to, they do like the revenue generating to be there before they start talking about investment.
But so Sonia, that might reflect the kind of VC they are. So some VCs have a lesser technical richness. I'm unusual. I mean, there's a mantra that my colleagues take me saying, which is, if it doesn't work, that's annoying. But if the world doesn't need it, that's a disaster.
That's a good one. Yes. Okay, so in terms of a spin out, what would you say are the three main things that a spin out needs to boost its chance of success? I mean, obviously, a good idea, which we've covered, and it needs to be sort of something that's unique or get ahead of the competition. But I suppose, are there other elements and enthusiasm we've discussed, but anything else?
I think, well, yes, I think there's a number of components. So let's assume that the technology is both of interest and work, and at its first iteration works. I think the first thing, and this is something which academic spin-outs are actually quite bad at doing, is actually understanding what their real market is. I.e., does anyone actually give a damn about the new mousetrap that you've just invented? And this is, and this can be really quite subtle. So, for example, if you're developing a diagnostic, does it actually make a difference to the treatment pathway? If it doesn't, there's no point in even embarking on it, because it's not going to change anything. So, and academics often, they love their ideas, but they're very bad at actually talking to people, because they think people are going to, or people are going to just diss the idea and say it's useless, and no one likes that. But you've got to market test it. So, for me, the people who've actually been out on, for example, the IKEA program, to actually really got some view of what people might do with the product that they've got, and that's the first thing. The second thing from a spin out is actually, you're never, as an early stage investor, you're never going to expect your team to be completely whole. It's not going to have everybody, and not everyone's going to be fully formed or fully experienced, etc. But you do need to know that you've got a balance of sort of some commercial expertise and the technical expertise, and a knowledge of what you need to get it to the next stage, whether it's the next funding round, or whether it's a revenue point, or whether it's a launch on the market, etc. And so team is all VCs will say team is the top three things that matters to them. It is important. You have to realize that as a VC at the stage that Oliver and I work, you're not going to be working with not working with the board of Unilever, for example. You're working with something which is good in parts, and you have to build around that. And so it's about building an ecosystem around the teams. And the other thing is an understanding of what an understanding of the funding journey that they need to go on to be able to get themselves to the point where they're, where they're self-sustaining, or whether they're sold, etc., etc. So a realistic appraisal of the amount of money it will probably take to get them through. And those are sort of three key things that I look at. And, there are others, but those were probably the top three for me.
And those points, just before we move to you, Oliver, I mean, the building the ecosystem around a team, how can companies do that when they've got no money and they are sort of a team of two that really are just starting out?
That's a good question. I mean, I think most of the people I deal with have got something around them to start with. They're either spinning out of a university, or they've got some mentors. There's regional. There's people around who can support you. Some are better than others, and so you've got to be very careful that you've got people who are, people around you who actually make sense. But I think it's. We have a program up in Newcastle where you bring a commercial person into the business as the business is spinning out from the university. So you actually have that's an exec who comes in, they get a stipend from the university while they're building the business plan and supporting the spin out, and then they move out with the business. So there's those sorts of programs to be able to do. But you need to talk to people, and people are very happy to give you help. Sometimes a bit too much, sometimes it can be a bit random, but a lot of it's about just going out and building your networks as a startup entrepreneur.
And then I suppose the other point, when you say the funding journey and being realistic about the amount of money you need, I think we see that all of the time. How can people, I suppose, is that the answer is getting somebody in that's been through the system and knows how it works to understand what kind of budget is realistic?
I think, and the VCs that they interact with will have an idea of that. But it's not, I mean, I had one where they said, oh yeah, we don't really need any money, but we'll come for a bit of money. We're now 6 years into it and 5 million, and we still haven't quite got to the end of it. So there's that sort of naivety which you need to be really, one needs to be to understand. A lot of it comes back to people making sensible assumptions which are testable and show that people are taking a logical approach to the whole process. Yeah, it's a sort of triage activity as much as anything else.
And Oliver, how about you? What are the three things that you would say actually a spin out needs?
It's not unfamiliar for us to have companies where there's slightly inexperienced management teams, they're missing something, so a skills gap. So we can help solve that. But I think what you want to see in the team is either recognition of a skills gap and an openness to solving it. There's nothing more alarming than a founder that wants to be the CEO, cannot be the CEO, but doesn't accept that they ought not to be the CEO. So that's the first thing. So willingness to adapt and to grow and to change. The second thing is, and this is a biotech thing, a really, really strong understanding of IP. Because when you're selling a biotech, you're not selling the people, you're just selling a patent and some evidence. So it's absolutely crucial that they are red hot on the IP. And we sold a couple of companies, and actually when I worked in a biotech, we sold a couple of assets. It's generally mind-blowing the amount of diligence you will get from your big pharma acquirers when it comes to IP, because they're going to put hundreds of millions of pounds into a patent number. And so that's the other thing, is like a very good strategy and some good advice around IP. And the third thing is like Alex's point, is these companies always take longer than they say, always. And nothing ever works quite as smoothly as people think. So what we try to say is, well, look, just lay out, not the money, but lay out what you're trying to show. What is the first step of proving the technology's got a good solution? What's the next step? What's the next step? And once you know that, then you can backfill the numbers. The worst companies that come to me and say, well, we can only raise about 1 million, so we're going to do this. That is almost dooming yourself to failure, because this is often premature. So you've got to pick a risk point and then get enough money to get there.
Yeah,
that's the other point. So we're really interested in risk points, and actually, it's really easy in some markets. Everybody knows what the risk points are for drug development. It's really simple. They might not work, but at least you know what you've got to show. It's much harder, as Alex said, in diagnostics, for example. What is the evidence that it works in a new diagnostics platform? What is the evidence in a piece of software that's going to help with patient compliance, that it's useful? So sometimes for companies, the reason why it can be harder to raise is your risk point is much later. And so you have to fly a bit blind when you're investing.
It sounds like someone's making a cup of tea or doing the dishes.
They are. I can't
I'll
stop
have a
you.
cup.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I put myself on mute when I'm not talking.
It's just making us all hungry, that's all. And I think in terms of the skills gap, which is an interesting one, and recognition, because we've have experienced that where companies haven't got that self-awareness of what gaps that they miss. And it's a difficult conversation. I mean, do you as early stage VCs have those conversations if companies come to you and you really like the idea, but you just don't think the team in front of you are the right people to take that forward? Are you quite blunt about that?
I think you have to be. Sometimes they accept it. Other times they just ignore it and run away and go off to talk to someone else, which is that's a that's a self-exclusion. And it's easy to, I mean, because you're in that sort of weird position as being the money in inverted commas. You sort of feel as though we're not necessarily right. Sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we think someone might be absolutely terrible as a CEO, but actually turns out to be really, really good. And I think we have to recognize that in ourselves as well. But on the whole, you can tell the ones where there's the balance, where there's the skills, the recognition of skills gap. I think is the really, really important thing. Even if you're prepared to go out and find some help, then that's a huge step in the right direction.
Absolutely. No, and do we tell people? I've learned from this. I mean, I'm fairly clean and upfront about it. But there was a company I really liked, and they wouldn't take our money because I'd said to them, I don't think you're right to be CEO. They raised money from another fund that charmed them. A month later, they weren't CEO. So do you talk about it? It can be an issue. But I think sometimes this is a long-term relationship. When we invest in a company, we can't just get out. We can't just sell our shares to somebody else because we don't like it anymore. And the founder can't just leave because if they do, they lose their shares. So you have to be able to work together. So it's a people-based relationship. And so it is a conversation I have a lot of, which is it's wonderful that you're CEO now, but you're not going to be CEO in a year's time. We're going to put an exec chair in place, and we're going to put you across into a CTO or a CSO type job. That's not an uncommon conversation. And it just reflects different people are very good at different things. And people also probably should ask themselves, do they really want to spend their lives thinking about HR policies and manufacturing contracts and dealing with admin accounts who's had an because somebody in marketing drove into their car, all that kind of stuff? That is not many people's idea of heaven when they are technologists that want to solve the problems of their places.
So these are nicely to the next question, which we talk about the management requirements you look for. So normally you have a founder. So in terms of management, what's sort of the minimum that you would look for to feel confidence in a company?
I'll take that one, Oliver.
So me or you? I've got views, you've got views. I mean, we do different kinds of companies, don't we? So slightly different requests, probably. So for me, I'm very happy to back a first-time founder. I mean, some of our most successful companies have been a postdoc coming out of university with a really interesting science. They're clearly very clever. They're massively motivated, but they have around them some grey hair in an exec chair that can provide some mentoring and some help. And the classic case study we have right now is we've got a really interesting company that's got an in silico platform for designing some drugs, but they don't know anything about how to structure a deal with a pharma customer. And so you solve that by the CEO, the undone, gets the appointment, but the exec chair, who has done these deals before, can sit around and help with the term sheets. So that kind of combination of skills is what we look for and we put in place.
Yeah, I think
on that point, I think. Oh, sorry, Alex. I was going to say when we spoke yesterday as well, we talked, didn't we, about having a wrapper around a company and how some companies, just because they've had experienced people that have already taken things to market and they might have graduated from Oxford or Cambridge, they're able to get VCs interested a lot sooner and for a lot bigger sums of money. I mean, do you think that idea of consciously trying to wrap the best looking team around a company to get VC success is a good path to go down?
I think so. Yeah, I think I mean, you want to, if you think down the line, you're thinking of some of the problems or some of the issues that are going to have to be faced by that company as they develop the technology, as they start interacting with the market. So you want to be able to have be reasonably confident that when they do meet these issues, they've got someone who can actually deal with it, and work with it. And it may not be the CEO because they are a first-time entrepreneur, a first-time CEO. But again, it comes back to, what does the board look like? What does the ecosystem around there? Is there an executive chair? I mean, I'm like you, Oliver. I've got one with an executive chair of grey hairs and a postdoc, and it's working really, really well at the moment, because and the postdoc's going, growing like leaps and bounds as he learns from the exec chair. So it's really, I mean, one of the things I find, people often try and bring commercial, say, for want of a better word, business development or sales people into a business way too early, at a point when the product market fit hasn't been sorted out, at the point where there really isn't, there may not even be anything to sell in a concrete fashion. And that's where the founder and the people who really understand it are able to go out and evangelize. But bringing other people in, it's just I've seen this happen so many times, where they bring in a commercial director and they just have a miserable time because they haven't got the ability to, or anything really, to get their teeth into. So you've got to be really careful about what the team, what functions you need at a particular time and bring them on board.
Yes. And look, I think these are interesting challenges that companies have faced over time. Probably, sorry, we're now moving on to the cake period of the dinner. Probably, when you're talking about companies being spun out with charity backing, you're looking for people that are really able to understand the technology, the technical kind of demands, so the regulatory demands, and to be able to set up and put in place possibly some of the clinical evidence that you need to gather. You're certainly not looking for people that are going to be able to get revenue. You might need people that can give you some advice around contracts, so working with CROs, CMOs, and with big corporate clients, but they're all available as consultants. So I wouldn't overhire. I would just understand what you don't know.
Yes, good. And I've got two more questions, but I'm just sort of say to the rest of the group, feel free to put your hands up if anyone's got questions. So one of mine was about co-investing. So who do you co-invest with and why?
We co-invest with everyone from institutions, charities, angel groups, individual angels. I think in a perfect world, every single one of those co-investors would bring individual skills and knowledge and depth of knowledge to the party. One has to be realistic about this. Sometimes some of the co-investment is just is money, and and that's great, but that's all it comes with. So you want, if you're doing this, you really do want to have a mixture of people who can bring added value in some way, shape, or form. So my last slide about co-investing with charities basically outlines the sort of things that we would hope for from having a charity involvement. If you've got the VCs, which have got very long, very good black books in terms of management, non-execs, they've got deep relationships with maybe particular pharma companies or particular big companies who might be the customers. These are all things which are a value that you're looking for. In terms of the co-investment, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a wrap around the company so that the company can absorb the shocks of things going wrong, because they always will. Every time something goes wrong. And so you don't want to one of the problems with VC, venture capital in this country, is we tend to underfund, and that's absolutely fine if everything works 100%, but it never does. And so you have to have the ability to make sure that you can continue to support the business through the difficult times, assuming it's not complete bust, but assume as well as the good times. So you really want to put people around who've got the ability to continue to invest, as well as the people who can put the first check in, and that's something that we're really that we look for in our co-investors, particularly. So it's a mixture of expertise, length of pocket, and also the other thing with your co-investors, you do have to have similar time horizons about what you're trying to do. If you're investing in someone who wants to be out in 2 years and another person who wants to be out in 15, you can end up with some real tensions, because as Oliver said, once you're in, you're in. There's no mechanism for getting out until you either have a secondary where someone buys all the investors out, or you have a sale of some sort. So, it is a long-term relationship.
And in terms, just for sort of the benefit of people on the call that are new to investing, like we were at PCR, we co-invested with you, Alex, at Northstar, and you did a lot of the heavy lifting around the term sheet, and we kind of could trust and rely on your team, if you like, to undertake the more commercial parts of putting the deal together. Are you happy to do that if you're working with charities that, you know, they're bringing in their patient advocacy or that, but
Yeah,
you don't feel that
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're perfectly happy to lead, and certainly at the stages that we go in, we're perfectly happy to lead deals and do the heavy lifting. One of the things is because we're a regional fund, we're tending to bringing cash in from outside the region, so we are the sort of, you know, sort of the point man with the businesses anyway. And you know, there's a lot of talk about leading and following, etc., etc. We're perfectly happy to do that. You know, if we believe in something, we'll do it.
Alex, can I, because I think it's a good point. So the reality is, unless a fund is investing in a company in isolation, then whilst we could be the lead, Alex could be the lead, all the final nuance gets agreed between the company and all the investors anyway.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of toing and froing, and that, the slide's not open here, but this is worth thinking about because broadly speaking, when you set up a company, if you're spinning out from an institution or and you've got some research funding, the charity could be putting more cash into it, in which case it's an investor, same as we are, or as Alex would be, or it's a shareholder by virtue of the money it's already put in through the translational funding. And so we've worked with charities on both sides. And I think Alex has summed it up nicely. They bring a huge amount of technical and market expertise, which is really useful. But they are sometimes, because they don't necessarily have much money to invest and they don't do many investments rather, probably a little bit less familiar with the investment side. So it is important for a charity to work with VCs that are supportive. And I think that's quite useful. And I think the other point that I really like from what Alex is saying is, you know, if you've got a good enough idea, you can raise money, but you should be really careful about who your co-investors are because you're with them for a long time and you need them to support you again. And one of the things that I really like seeing in syndicates is other investors that can invest in the next round, because it's hard to raise money right now. It's much easier to raise a foundation than it used to be. It's much harder to raise a big seed raise or a Series A raise than it used to be. So you need to take companies to a later stage, which means more money and more ability to invest from the people already in the company, because it's the easiest thing in the world for me to take it too early and then not get engaged. So you've got to get past that it's too early, and that is not easy.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's enough money available for these early stage companies, or do you feel that trying to no? And how do you see that as being solved, or don't you?
Oh, I'd go to America. It's 5 times the money there. No, I'm joking. I don't mean that. What I actually mean is it is hard to raise money, but I think the reality is for young companies, so companies being founded, as I said a few minutes ago, probably I'd really urge them to raise to a good risk point, not just raise what they can get away with, if that makes sense, because it just means that whilst you've got going, you're going to run into a brick wall in a year's time, which is when you're really busy, you can't hire somebody because your cash flow is restrained, you can't sign up for the new labs you need because you've only got 6 months worth of cash left in the bank, not a year's runway. So try and raise a bit more than you think to start with to give you some flexibility. As Alex said, we underfund companies in the UK, and that isn't going to change immediately. But give yourself some space by having a little bit of buffer in there, so you can pivot slightly if you need to.
It's a truism of gambling that if a rich gambler will always beat a poor gambler, however lucky they are, and this is where we are in a non-level playing field, particularly with the US, where the funding levels are much higher, and I think until we realize that in this country, it does make the venture industry or the early stage investment industry much more difficult. I mean, seed rounds have massively increased in size over the last 5 to 10 years, but yeah, they naturally need to be big. They do in fact need to be bigger. And I think we're getting, beginning to get them. That idea is beginning to people understand that, and we're beginning to do something about it. So it's a positive, going forward, hopefully.
And I mean, the last one from me before hopefully we'll take more questions from outside. In terms of charities, I suppose, and the value that they add, obviously we talked about co-investment and expertise and experience, but are there any other, I mean, do you think that as a sector, the VCs see charities as a valuable co-investor or partner? And do you think there's more that charities could do and perhaps those within the TAR network could do to help VCs to understand what they can bring in terms of access to patients, clinical trials, data, samples?
I think it's about setting out your stall, actually. I think there's a marketing element from the charities. I mean, someone like CRUK is well known for what it does in translational research. And I think there is a if you're interested and you want to do this, you need to work out what the offer is. And I think on that basis, most investors will be very pleased to work with charities because of the things I said earlier. The expertise, the patient access, etc.
Yeah. So I mean, look, we've worked with lots of charities in different ways. I think the really brilliant thing working with charities, they've got access to people that know the space, and so you can get technical diligence, which is great. They often fund multiple projects in a space, so you can get a competitive point of view quite nicely, which is useful. They often do have access to hospitals, so they can help with those initial testing facilities. All of anything that can smooth a development program is super, super useful. And depending on how the charity works, they might well be the IP owner anyway, so you work with them as a direct shareholder in the company. But all of these relationships are really positive. I think the only thing I'd add is, in certain areas, certainly in healthcare, these companies will need a lot of money. So very quickly, the input from a charity is by definition is reduced versus the other people around the table. And so just that does happen over time. There's an evolution of influence, which sometimes is harder for charities to experience because they haven't come across it before.
That's really interesting. But that's the questions that I had. So is there anything that anybody else on the call had the desire to ask? I'm just wondering if we have to throw it open to the floor. Okay, so Jane.
I was going to ask the floor whether, having listened today to Alex and Oliver, whether there's kind of a feeling of confidence now about potential for co-investing with VCs, or whether there are any sort of underlying questions that you don't feel have been answered for you. No one?
Can I ask a question?
Catherine.
So
Catherine had her hand up.
Okay, sorry.
I was trying to find my hand up. Hi, Catherine Forbes, Director of Innovation and Enterprise at Kidney Research UK. So we have made some investments and we're starting to build that portfolio, but we're still quite new in. We are not FCA accredited. And I suppose in terms of collaborating on investments, through sort of syndicates and things, I'm always a little nervous because I'm not fully au fait with FCA, that whole induced to invest, recommendations and things. What's the best approach if we, is sort of individual charities or potential collaborators amongst ourselves, when actually approaching kind of VCs, because we think that, if we think we understand your profile and what you might be looking for, and as a prospective syndicate partner, are there any sort of do's and don'ts that you might want to just sort of share? Because there are a lot of us in this room who are very, very new to this. So I'm taking one for the team.
I mean,
so
you go, Oliver. Yeah.
Well, no, look, if it's a cold approach, and actually most VCs work through lots of warm introductions. So I'm fairly certain that I've sent stuff to Alex and he sent stuff to me that is either in scope for each fund or not. And so, first of all, always talk to the charities, the other VCs if there's any other VCs you should be introduced to, because that helps hugely. And then when you make that first contact, try and think about it from the VC's point of view, because the reality is I get hundreds of companies a year to look at. And what you just want to try and say is this is a really a novel solution to a big problem, and it's got this level of evidence behind it. That kind of opening gambit is really useful. And the reason I like to see that, it really cheers me up, is because we sometimes see companies that are probably, and we invest really early, but are prematurely being spun out. So to overcome that sense that this shouldn't really be spin out, but they're spinning out now because they can't get any more grant funding, that's kind of useful.
I don't think, I think one part of your question was about whether there was a regulatory issue if you were essentially approaching VCs. The VCs are, I mean, whether we're right or not, are considered sophisticated investors. So we're able to make up our own mind. So there's no issue with
No.
you approaching us.
No, not so.
You're not selling a snake oil or anything like that. We're supposedly big enough and ugly enough to look after ourselves. But having said, on the flip side of that, I think if a charity comes to us with something that you've been working on for some time, and the academics or whatever, and you've actually put your own money as grant money into it, then that's an endorsement which we would take seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. No, don't be nervous about reaching out to VCs. There's no risk there at all.
Jesse, you're mute.
I know. I was going to say that's a very comforting answer. I think for many of us.
Good.
I always have a good question. Thank you.
Well, so actually, I had a question back to the panel, which is there's a group of charities around the table here, give lots of grants. How much of that grant giving process is actually thinking about the reality of a spin out and the commercial value of the translation behind the funding? How many have a VC that sit anywhere near your grant giving bodies and say, this is not a commercial idea, don't touch it? Because that might be something worth thinking about.
Any views from the room? I mean, I know that
I would say things are changing to balance out the research portfolio. Historically we have awarded grants, and a lot of that has been very early stage discovery science, but not necessarily with that sort of view to the longevity and the development, that sort of, developing the pipeline of its progression through to the patient bench to, the whole bench to bedside. So, we're certainly moving in that direction and really sort of focusing on the translation and where those kind of really getting under the skin of the research. And the research is to understand where that prospective commercial opportunity actually lies. And building our kind of internal capacity and expertise to really sort of be able to do that, so that we can then sort of move it to the next stage, which is through our equity investments. Well, we class them as social investments, but because we also invest up to Series A.
Yeah.
At the moment. Yeah.
Question to the rest of the room by show of hands that we won't record or hold anybody to. How many of you have built into your grant systems any kind of consideration in relation to commercialization potential for grant applications? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. The clap. It's 5. So that's.
Oh, you're on mute, Catherine.
I can't find my hand for reacting. I was going to say it's probably half, as in, in terms of what is the potential benefit, what does it look like? But we're looking at sort of strengthening that. Same with the patient need, unmet need.
Not necessarily the question about commercialization potential, but the question about meeting the unmet need and potential to generate IP. Yeah.
Well, the reason I ask is I used to sit on some grant panels with the BBSRC, and they were the follow-on fund, the super follow-on fund, and they're really interesting because they're big grants and they're quite translational. But you see such a wide range of understanding of how you would take something to market. It was quite remarkable. And so one of the few questions that I always felt like a naughty schoolboy, because I used to sit at the back with another VC and we just asked lots of questions. It might be a question to put in some of your processes if they are translational, which is how are you going to spin it out? And then don't just accept the answer, we'll spin it out. Just a few more, which is why is it a good spin out? What is the market? Who have you spoken to about this? That kind of stuff might be interesting. If you're doing translational funding, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a hand up.
Oh, I can see a hand up. Sorry. Xavier.
Yes, hi. I feel like a little bit, I'm probably the odd one out here, as I'm gray hair. I dropped out of my position as professor to take up a startup. So I'm actually not working for a charity or a VC, but a startup. And also, working in more medtech than just purely biotech. But from what has been spoken about, it seems that there's a very interesting aspect of funding for startup that has not been approached at all, where charities or VCs can also help co-fund is Innovate UK as part of the UKRI. And I was wondering what you think about that, because actually Innovate UK helps de-risking a lot of early development, which are much more translational in nature, because they are early development directly and for these grants, you don't need to demonstrate so much that the science works, but that there's a market for it.
I mean, I think both Oliver and I are investor partners with
we are.
So where these are specific grant programs which require an investor to come along as a match to the grant from Innovate UK, and that for me has been a really excellent. We've done these both in a general level, but also around increasing the numbers of angels going into businesses. We ran a big program for healthy aging, which we ran over 4 years, where we invested, I think. We Innovate put in about 6 million quid, and we put in about the same alongside co-investors. So it was quite a big program, and these are really important. I think Innovate is playing an increasing role in the market at the moment, and they're moving. One of the other things we're doing a lot of work with them on is investor loans, which is relatively soft loans to support the research effort while there's a commercialization effort backed by VC, backed by investors going on at this in parallel. So yeah, it's a really important strand for startups and for VCs. And I'll also give a shout out for their IKEA program, which gives early career researchers the ability to go out and talk to potential customers. There's a big workshop on that next week. But that's something that we and the universities I work with use a lot as a way of market validation of early stage ideas. So yeah, there's lots going on there. I really
Yep. Look, we work non-dilutive funding is great. I think Innovate can take technologies related to TRL at all, which is really useful.
Okay. Jane asked me to
Great.
introduce myself.
I was just wondering, Xavier, you're a fresh face, and so I don't think
Yes, I mean, I received this invitation via Capital Enterprise somehow. It doesn't look like there's many actual startup on this call. It's mostly a discussion between VCs and the car network, right?
I think that was because I know Lotus at the CTO, which is Capital Enterprise, and I forward this to her because I know she works with early stage companies now as well.
Oh, fantastic. I do hope you do come to later discussions. It'd be great to have you along.
Absolutely, yeah. So if I just introduce, I left my chair at UCL to take on my spin out, which is now 10 years old, and lead it from the front, as it were, as opposed to being a grey hair in a chairman's chair, as was mentioned before.